A sinkhole in Pomeroy delayed traffic and disrupted work on the village's downtown revitalization project today. Our Chase Campbell talked to the mayor of Pomeroy about the issue.
According to Pomeroy Mayor Dawn Anderson, workers made an unexpected discovery during construction on 2 crosswalks on Main Street, part of the village's large-scale downtown riverfront revitalization project.
By chance, when they were removing the pavement, they discovered a sinkhole.
The Ohio Department of Transportation responded with workers spending the better part of the day excavating the sinkhole and attempting to identify its cause. Anderson says though they haven't had sinkholes in this particular part of Main Street before, they have had issues with them elsewhere in the village, something Anderson says is an inevitability given the age of the town's infrastructure.
It's an old town with old drainage systems. Some of them are masonry. There are actually even there used to be some wood that have been probably in the ground for 150 years. So that's something this is clay tile, and none of those systems last forever. So when you get 150 years on them, you're probably going to have some issues, which is what we have.
Despite the inconvenience presented by the sinkhole, Anderson says they're lucky to have found it when they did.
The upside is the sinkhole existed, and we found it with doing a pretty much unrelated thing with an excavator, and that sinkhole might have been discovered by it giving way with a vehicle or something like that, which would have been a bad thing. So we have to look at it like it's a blessing in disguise.
Wednesday afternoon, Anderson said he expected excavation to be completed by the end of the day and that he hopes the cause of the sinkhole is identified so the village knows what steps to take next. In Pomeroy, Chase Campbell, WTAP News.
Construction is almost done on